Featuring the music of Franz Liszt. David, good morning.
Good morning, Matt.
How many days have we been doing this so far on Liszt?
I have no idea, but I think that we have about 30 pianists now represented in the Liszt series. And we'll continue today with more works by Liszt. One of them will be one of his interesting, he called them a reminiscence of an opera, and this will be on Robert the Devil, a work by Meyerbeer, who was probably the most important opera composer of the period in Paris during the 30s and 40s. And Robert the Devil was one of his hits, as most of his operas were. They seem to capture the spirit of the times, and they were grand opera. And pianist composers were really almost expected to make paraphrases out of operas. The opera was one of the most glamorous things that the public could attend in that day, and to have the allure of the opera rub off on you is what the composer of these piano transcriptions would try to do. The idea of the opera was a very important thing at that time. Very glamorous, as it still is.
Civilization.
Yeah. Oh, you've seen the ads.
I've seen and heard and read.
For the Metropolitan Opera. Civilization is a phone call away. Well, it's also just the flick of your radio, huh? Well, what is your opinion now of Liszt? We have seen so many aspects to this mad character.
Highly variable, basically, is my opinion.
Yeah.
And his best-known works are probably his worst.
Yes. Well, on this program, we are going to hear one of his most deeply felt works, which is a set of variations on a theme of Bach. And we will hear it in two versions, one for organ and the other for piano. But we will begin with the only recording I know of the Réminiscences of Robert le Diable, and it's subtitled Valse infernale, after Meyerbeer. And this piece was on the program when Wagner heard Liszt play in Paris in 1841. Now, this was the first encounter to one of the fantastic friendships in the history of music. Well, the future son-in-law wrote, "Someday Liszt will be obliged in heaven to play before the assembled angels his Fantasia on the Devil, but probably for the last time." Anyway, this is raucous and racy music, and it's full of mockery and fun, and it demands big strength, great endurance, and we get the kind of bravura necessary in a performance by the American virtuoso Earl Wild. And that's the Valse infernale from the Reminiscence of the opera Robert the Devil, one of Meyerbeer's great hits. And here is a great example of Liszt using the muscular resources of the piano. Before, piano teachers would put a coin on one's hand, and you had better not drop it because you might get the hand slapped with a ruler. And Liszt realized if the full potential of the instrument, which was now built with this cast iron frame, was to have all of its possibilities realized, you would have to use more than just your fingers and wrists. You would have to use your triceps and your latissimus dorsi and all those other fancy muscles.
In other words, he really expanded the dynamic range of the piano.
Tremendously. And of course, he brought out the evocative elements of the piano as no other composer had up to that time, not even Chopin.
Well, let me ask you about this then. Prior to Liszt's writing for the piano, how had the loudest possibility of the piano been indicated? I mean, it's forte, and then you have some extensions of that. How the forte for Beethoven was not as loud as it was for Liszt, for example?
No, it was not. Number one, the pianos, Beethoven, of course, extended the resources of the instrument beyond what it could take. And most of Beethoven's sonatas were not performed in public during Beethoven's lifetime. Very few. And Beethoven was a tumultuous musician, of course, and as a pianist as well, and he broke many an instrument.
Oh, so the breaking of the instruments
yes,
that Liszt is so famous for was really not a first for anyone.
No, the piano of Mozart's time could not have possibly, or early Beethoven, not have possibly even dared a piece like this. It would have been shattered.
Mm-hmm.
Think of the energy and the muscularity built into this piano fantasy that we just heard, played brilliantly with lots of mockery and fun by Earl Wild. And this is the demonic Liszt, which has this kind of humor. It's not, Liszt took the devil, tongue-in-cheek. Well, we have a spot, and we will be back with a work of much greater quality. Now called Variations on Bach's Weinen, Klagen, Sorgen, Zagen. And this is one of his very, very great pieces of music. Unfortunately not played enough. There are two versions. The piano came first, and then he wrote this deep-felt work for the organ. It was created after the death of one of his children, and Liszt was in quite a despondent mood around 1862, after this event, naturally. Robert Collette writes of Liszt and the organ, as early as 1836, Liszt had revealed an astonishing mastery over the organ. He was living in Geneva at that time with the Countess d'Agoult. During the summer, they had organized a holiday excursion to a village where they were joined by George Sand and one or two other guests. Every day they would set out on a ramble across the beautiful countryside, eating a picnic lunch under the trees or by a mountain stream. It was during one of these excursions that the exhausted party arrived at Freiburg and entered the church of St. Nicholas. There, Liszt saw a particularly fine organ built by the famous Muger. He sat down and astounded everybody by improvising for several hours. His concentration was so intense he appeared to be in a trance, and the impact of his playing was so great that the company grew frightened and withdrew. They had witnessed something unique, and it was an event none of them ever forgot. Liszt played the organ a good deal in middle and later life, and we know that he practiced on the pedal piano. His organ works show great insight into the instrument. They have been criticized for reflecting too strongly the 19th century tendency to be concerned mainly with the power of the organ, a power which enabled it to produce massive effects rivaling those of the orchestra, to be, in fact, a one-man orchestra. But we must remember that the whole trend of organ building during the 19th century was determined by this outlook. It was the Romantics who turned the organ into the king of instruments, and we can hardly be surprised at the result when the king of pianists wrote for it. Let's hear the version of this great set of variations in a performance by Daniel Chorzempa, a young organist born in Minneapolis in 1944. And he's playing the organ of the concert hall De Doelen in Rotterdam. You have heard the organist Daniel Chorzempa at the organ of the concert hall De Dulen in Rotterdam in a performance of Franz Liszt's variations on Bach's Weinen, Klagen, Sorgen, Zagen. And these variations date from 1862, and Liszt took the theme from the opening chorus of Bach's cantata of the same name, where it is also used as a ground bass. Incidentally, this same theme again appears in the Crucifixus of the B minor Mass. That was the organ transcription from the piano work, which we will now hear in a performance by Gunnar Johansen. The work was dedicated to the second most eminent pianist of the 19th century, Anton Rubinstein. Let's hear this masterly set of variations. Gunnar Johansen. a work from 1862, Franz Liszt's Variations on Bach's Weinen, Klagen, Sorgen, Zagen. The pianist was Gunnar Johansen. And on our next program, we'll continue with Liszt. And at 12 o'clock noon, join us when the great American composer Ned Rorem will be arriving in our studios to play some of his music and discuss it. Thank you for listening.